Some of them. All right, it says it's recording now, so we will begin. Critical Thinking of Society, lecture number 7. Yep, on the 2nd of March 2021. Welcome. We're online. Next week we'll be in person. And next week I will talk about the midterm. So I hope to see everyone there. We'll actually probably do the midterm in the class rather than do a take-home. So it would be advisable for everyone to come. Midterm is an assignment. It will be a drawing task, of which I haven't yet planned. I also want to talk next week about the direction of the course and some class excursion that I hope we can still do in these times of COVID. I think it's possible. And there's various permissions I have to get. And I also wanted to ask you about something about publishing. But we'll talk about all that in due course. I'm going to talk today in the lecture part about a model for critical thinking, I suppose. And more about some of the key themes we've been talking about related to the university. But I want to slowly also adjust this focus, the kind of case study that I've been thinking of, to look at other institutions as well, other institutions besides education, and what might they be. I thought for a while that health would be a key one. Last year in one of the courses, we spent a lot of time talking about pandemic, COVID and so on, and read various texts. Right now I'm reading The Plague by Albert Camus, nearly finished. It's taking me a while though. It's a little bit too close to the bone, really. I see in Germany they've come up with a new word, which is called Coronamuda. Coronamuda. Let me type it out onto the chat so you see Coronamuda. What that If you look in the chat, you see Coronamuda. Muda means tired in Germany. So now Germans make words by joining words together, and sometimes they borrow from English into German. And Coronamuda means sick of hearing about COVID-19, basically. Corona is the name for COVID-19 pandemic, and some people are suitably fed up with talking about it. Some people are not. I mean, the experience in Europe is hard for us perhaps to grasp because it's been so different here, thankfully. But interesting that it's emerging now in the institution of language. So health was one possibility. Language is another kind of, is language an institution? I think language can be understood as an institution. It's certainly a way of framing and brings with it worldviews, which is also what education as an institution does, or health. I mean, health is also like physical and material, but it's also a mentality, a worldview, and a whole conceptual apparatus that makes us understand where we are in the world. So other institutions I was thinking about. A classical way to talk about institutions in social science maybe relies a little bit on a Marxist thinker from France called Louis Althusser. And a lot of people in education talk about him because he had the concept of the ideological state apparatus. And the ideological state apparatuses are the ways in which the state interpolate, his word is interpolate, involve, include citizens into the project of the nation. And this is through institutions, ideological state apparatus. The apparatus is the institution, like education, like the hospital system, the health system, right? Or like libraries, like the prison, like what else? Prisons, schools, hospitals. Yeah, they're kind of ways of managing a population, I suppose. And we have chosen to do this, or we agree to, in society, to have these formations and divide the world up into this, like we were talking about disciplines last time, divide the world up into this set. Other institutions that interpolate us, that include us in society, might be the family and play, games. That's a big way of interpolating or socializing people. The party, joining a political party. I guess recreation parks and nature and so on, zoos, places to go, visit, see animals, do research on animals, and so on. Okay, so ideological state apparatuses. I want to talk about where we're going in the rest of the course in relation to these institutions. Museums would be another one, and I've been thinking about museums a lot, not just for this course, but I think we could go a lot deeper into museums. Television, the media, is a massive institutional apparatus. Not just television, of course, also social media and computers and screens and how we're communicating now. Certainly, the word interpolate, how people are positioned, drawn into the project of society, is really an important critical thought concept, critical concept. And Althusser is important for that reason. Also, he was a leader of the French left, wrote interesting books called For Lenin, For Marx, Lenin in Philosophy, For Marx. But he came out of favor because later in his life he accidentally, it seems, strangled his wife. It's pretty terrible. He was considered mad or legally judged mad, so he never had to go to court. And he complains he never got a chance to talk, to confront his accusers. There's some suggestion that it was a suicide pact gone wrong or something. Anyway, messy. So Althusser fell out of favor, but he was a very important figure in the intellectual left in the 70s. Anyway, games is one that I wanted to focus on. And you see from the slide that we're looking at right now, some students from courses I've done here at Ton Duc Tang playing a game, which I'd hoped to be able to play in class today. But I think, one, the class is too big, and certainly will be next week when everyone comes for the midterm. But it's one that comes out of a project called the Mapping Queen Mary University project. And it was a group of students and some staff who came together to prepare a map. Wanted to do a kind of report, but did it in the style of a map and a game as a way to convey the information in the report. Had a lot of information to convey, which seemed maybe a bit bureaucratic or boring, about how universities were using the visa system, immigration system, and a lot of controls and regulations to manage the student population from overseas from an English university. And the game, by playing the game in groups, it's a role-playing game and a kind of like a board game like Snakes and Ladders, I suppose. Lots of instructions. The instructions are kind of a way to learn about the issues. So each, like, I guess if you think of a game like Monopoly, you can learn a little bit about capital, housing market. Not really, but a little. This was a much more informative version of that. On the back was a map of the university and where people were coming from all over the world into the university, and how much money was being made by those international students. Here they are playing it more in this course. And on the game side was this counter game, and each tile had information about the visa system, the entry system to the university, and you had to do things like get your language certificate, IELTS 7.0 or whatever, get your visa, and different ways to get a visa. One tile, for example, was like a chance tile in Monopoly, but this one was one way around through the system to advance yourself towards the end, which is winning is getting a place in the university in Queen Mary. You could do a visa marriage, get married to someone, another player in the game, and you had to set up a household to get a visa. If you have a visa through marriage, you don't have to pay the same high fees that an international student would have to pay to enter into that university. Anyway, this is something that I've used in classes before, and we would have been doing it today, but you can't really do it online. I'm sure we could make an online version, but it takes a long time to make a game. But I did want to show something from that class, which is a little film that was made. And yeah, I'm going to show this. Let me say a few things about the film. It has translation, subtitles. I hope you'll be able to see them on your screens. So I hope you're not watching on a phone, so the subtitles will be quite small on a phone. I think, maybe not, yeah. And there's, anyway, there's a transcription and an essay about it you can get, which I'll put in links. This film was made by a couple of us in the faculty as a part of the evaluation process of our teaching. The Faculty of Education, Quality and Assurance, or whatever it's called, does a kind of audit, does a check on teaching, and asks us to do reports on what we're doing in teaching and what we think. And sorry, I'm like this, I don't know, just a habit of mine. Instead of doing a report, we made a map. Instead of doing a report for this, I said, let's make a film about how we're doing a particular course. The course was Modernity and Social Change, but very much is the same kind of course as the one we're doing right now. Yeah. So it's about 15 minutes, I think, 20 minutes. So we're going to play that. You'll see students doing work, me talking about the classes a lot. It's called Every Farmer is a Soldier. and it's so-called the model of teaching at TDTU, which is the model in our faculty anyway. Well, that's what we were saying, right? I don't think it's every course is like this at all, but it gave a flavor of how we were thinking at the time about our teaching in the university, or the role of our teaching in the faculty. And yeah, Every Farmer is a Soldier, sort of a funny title. It was about classroom research, and in the class I was asking people, first of all, to draw a map of Vietnam and include what was significant for them in it. And we did that 1 week. The next week we did a map of bodies and of houses. Well, that was another week. And the thing with the Vietnam map is everyone started to draw this perfect map of Vietnam, but I wasn't really after that. I asked them to say what was significant about, put on their map what was significant about different parts of the country for them. And well, we started off with everyone having almost the same map, drawing of Vietnam. By the end of the class, everyone had populated their map with things that made them very individual. And in a similar way, we were trying to use mapping as a kind of research tool. So we had this idea that we would chase a problem, research, and work out our own questions about how to map social change. We drew a map of unemployment, for example. Unemployment is an important issue, and it changes over time, and it changes in your lifetime. But how do you map it was a thing. And actually, the big issue for the class that was really interesting and engaging was this whole this question, unanticipated really, that came up about the problem of, on a map, how you show social change. You know, how do you map like a map is a snapshot, right? So how do you map social change? How do you show something that's moving on a snapshot? I mean, our conventional notion of a map is not time-based. That's the main thing. And so we had to find ways to get around that. Usually the way was in some kind of narrative form. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, right? That's narrative. But there are other more creative diagrammatic ways of showing it. Before and after is classic. Also narrative, but in a very simple way, version of showing change. But you can't show the moment of change. You can show before and after, but the actual change, I mean, in a way, we don't even have the language for that. Things, anyway. We're also doing research on the principle that every student is a researcher. We're thinking about the classroom as a site of research, influenced by a number of texts, and someone here. Now I'm going to try and show the film. So let me try and change this by stopping sharing, and then present now. Show a window. I'm afraid it's not there. Okay. There it is. Okay, so here comes the film. So you see there's my ugly face on the front at the start that I'm presenting my screen now. I'm going to try and pin it, aren't I? And that's there. and get it to play. So first of all, maybe someone in the chat can say whether or not you can read that subtitle. I mean, nothing I can do if you can't, as we are going to play the thing, but I'd be interested to find out if you can read the subtitle there. Xin chào, tôi tên là John Hudnick, etc. Okay. All right, we're going to, thank you, Sid. Watch this film now. Some of you might have already seen it, but yeah, maybe such a good film worth seeing twice. Not really. I want to hide that. And I want to play. Okay, we're starting now. Thank you very much. So it's 14 minutes, 14:42. Hi, my name is John Hudnick. I'm at TDT in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, and I'm presenting to you today the model of co-research for the sociology classroom. Okay, so the challenge of this model is something that we've thought about as useful for teaching students, and it's to see the idea is to see students from the beginning as researchers. It's about developing inspiration for research and for the creation of knowledge, the search for knowledge, and the production of knowledge. And then we see the students as partners in this. So it's to inspire independent research. And the idea that everyone is a researcher is something that we think is important. Okay, so there's a problem. The screen went black. Sorry about that. I think what will happen is I need to not do it as full screen. Okay, yeah. It couldn't cope with full screen. So Google Classroom is not the wonderful, robust resource that we hope it is. So I assume we can see the screen again now, the film again, and let me start playing it again. Let me know if it's working. Hi, my name is John Hudnick. I'm at TDT in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, and I'm presenting to you today the model of co-research for the sociology classroom. Okay, so the challenge of this model is something that we've thought about as useful for teaching students, and it's to see the idea is to see students from the beginning as researchers. It's about developing inspiration for research and for the creation of knowledge, the search for knowledge, and the production of knowledge. And then we see the students as partners in this. So it's to inspire independent research. And the idea that everyone is a researcher is something that we think is important for future development, skill development, whether or not it be in employment or working in some agency or an NGO or a committee or in a court or something. The idea that each student can research a topic and present a report about this is a very important thing for, international competitiveness or leadership, or if you like those kind of words. We start where we are. We start in the classroom, and we start with what we have, and we are trying to inspire creativity and not fearing any case where that might break down or fail or something. There's not a way to fail, really. Creativity is something you look for and search for, and it doesn't have a tested level. So we seek to see where we are now and the questions that come up when we start to ask critically about our situation in the world. The experiment for this model was that we used a class, Modernization and Social Change, where I was teaching readings from Capital and thinking about social change, and wanting to do this through a kind of mapping process. Thinking about mapping was important as well because it changes the orientation to knowledge production a little bit. and raises questions about what is knowledge production. I mean, a map has a lot of information in, and of course a map has to be researched, just like an essay, but because it's a different way of presenting the material, it makes the students maybe think a little bit more about questions of presentation and not fall into formulas or the usual ways of doing things. So we started out by asking them to draw a map of Vietnam and to each draw that map and present what they thought was important about the map. So every student was making a map of Vietnam, and at the start of the class they were being very careful to get the border of the country correct, and every map seemed to be similar. But as the class went ahead, we started to put in, I asked them to put in, and they came up with ideas themselves, put in different things into the map that were important to them, like where they were born or where they had been, or important things that they thought it was important to convey to someone viewing the map about Vietnam. What were the significant sites and so on. And it was very interesting that by the end of the class, we had 35 different maps of Vietnam. Not one correct map, but 35 interpretations. And it was the first lesson, I suppose. And then we were also looking at other maps. We had some maps that were maybe provocative of thinking in a different way. For example, we looked at the history of maps. We went back to Mesopotamia and the old Chinese maps and so on. Old European maps and Chinese maps used to, for example, have east at the top rather than what's conventional now is to have north in the top of the map. So that's very interesting. Why did they have east in the top? Because east was the center of the world back then, like China or for Europe, the east, everything came from the east, right? And the development of life for 2,000 years in Europe was east oriented. The development to the north is more recent. It's interesting to talk about that. But then the idea of having things make you think differently is also a very important thing for research in general. The idea of research is really to ask a question, is it possible to think differently than we do now about this topic? Any topic, right? What is the possibility of thinking differently? This comes from Foucault, but it's a generally good point. To do this, we can use a map again, and in one experiment we did in the class, I showed a map which was of Asia, but all the names were removed of the countries and all the identifying features except for the geographic outline of the countries were presented, but it was upside down. And I asked people to find out to show where they were in the map, and at first people could not identify where they were. And then, of course, the penny drops. They work out, one person works it out, and everyone sees that this is just an inverted map, and then it all makes sense. And then we can see that illustrated when one of the other teachers come into the class and see that process. Well, it's very interesting to challenge the way in which people's expectations are. Their expectations of what research is, for example, as well. The idea that a student is there to simply learn what has already been found and taught. You know, the model of teaching that it like opens up the student's head and pours in knowledge, like making a cup of tea, is really not what we're about at TDT. We need to work together to become questioning, challenging thinkers. And so that's why everyone is a researcher from day one. In the second class, we asked the students to draw a map of the body. Now, the body here is something to be mapped, that's a metaphor. And we talked a lot about metaphor and about ways of representing the body, modes of representation and pictures of the body. And we had different bodies. For example, we had the body of, the map of the body that shows all acupuncture points. And we had another one of Mao Zedong in his, Mao suit. And the underworld in China, it's from Michael Dutton's book, The Underworld in China. They've drawn a map of the different places where you can do pickpocket. You can different names for pickpocketing on Mao's body map. But the students were drawing their maps of themselves, and they were putting in what they thought was interesting, and it was the questions were coming from them. So it's largely about health and about fashion, and a lot about fashion, different kinds of identity presentation, different kinds of commodities that went into the look that people had, whether it be traditional or cultural or Western or modern or
subculture or something. It was very interesting to have that for discussion. And the maps of bodies were then also quite good fun, because we could illustrate, populate the maps with people we knew or liked or disliked. The next class was one where we brought in some of the readings that we've been looking at around labour and value, labour theory of value and work, unemployment, employment, informal and formal economy. And the challenge then was to draw a map that showed the different ways in which labour had made it possible for the students to come to work that day, come to class that day. So some of them, for example, living in student accommodation in Kituksa, what is the labour that produces that possibility of coming to class? The people that make the breakfast, the people that run the building, the people that built the building, the caretakers, the cleaners, the administrative staff, all of these kind of workers that are working to make it possible for someone to just wake up in the morning and walk down the stairs or down the lift. The lift has to be repaired, for example, and come to class. Coming across the campus means a whole lot of different kinds of work is going on. The beautification of the campus, the cleaners, the architects and the builders of the buildings, and all of these are labour that makes it possible for students to come to the classroom. The classroom itself it's got a whole lot of labour behind it, labour that makes it possible for the classroom to exist, for the electricity to come, the lights to be on, and so on. The timetabling, the security guard, all of this. And of course, the students themselves are products of labour because they've been brought up and socialised in society by their parents, the labour of giving birth and the labour of looking after children and teaching them to walk and to talk and to be students. So how to map all of these things? Maybe there's too many things for one map, so we have to make decisions about what we're going to include. And of course, there's also an aesthetic dimension to that. Our discussions became very interesting around all these things. What is it that people wanted to produce when they produced knowledge about, for example, formal and informal economy, or the labour of socialisation? All this, of course, was leading up to the final assessment, which was a more difficult and experimental challenge, and we didn't really know whether there was an answer for this. The idea was to show social change on a map. Now, it's a little bit easier, perhaps, to write an essay about social change because in narrative you can unfold the story. But in a map, everything is there at the same time. So how do you show social change? And that was a good challenge for the students. And they were thinking about the development of technology, the development of labour, the development of community, the development of, everything from their villages through to the development of transport around Ho Chi Minh City. Different topics that had to be researched, but then there was also the problem of presentation. So how you communicate this material. And we got some fantastic results, which we, I hope, can now have a look at when we move from here, me talking, and that's a bit boring, right, to the classroom and see some of the work. Okay, so thank you for watching this presentation of the model on social sciences and humanities of co-research for the sociology classroom. We've hoped that through this model we can show how we care about the students' capacity for inquiry and enhancing that through participatory exercise and the experience of being researchers themselves. We think they are always researchers when they write essays, but in this case they are making maps. That was to make them reflect on what is at stake in the process and think about it in a different way. I mean, we want to be able to teach our students to do more in terms of research than look things up on Google, which everyone can do now, but to really think deeply and critically into the ways in which knowledge is produced. And this video was about that. So we thank you for watching the video. We hope we can explain more about what is the model of co-research through some of the documents we attach, and we have like a bibliography and some footnotes available if anyone is interested. Thank you for watching, and thank you for the producers who have made this video. Bye.
Thiệt sự là quá sao.
Okay. Presenting. Thanks for watching that. Hope it was smooth. It seemed to be a little bit jumpy, the image on the screen, but mostly it worked. I'll go back to my slide. If anyone has any comment on that film, you can put them, say them now, or you know, the usual forms of comment are welcome. I have the chat open. So yeah, where was I? You see some of the people in the class and some of the issues we were trying to deal with, and some of the texts there that were the reading, and you know, you'll see it's very similar to, a lot of it is similar to this course, because in a way I no longer teach that social change course. Most of the reading was Marx, really. Now I've changed abandoned that course in exchange for this one, and some of the texts are brought forward. For example, Marx's 1880 text on workplace inquiry. He sent out 1,000 surveys to factory workers in France, trying to find out about their conditions, and the history of this so-called co-research or inquiry method in sociology is a part of it. So we read things from that history, including about Pravda, the Soviet newspaper, which included for a long time a very interesting section at the back, usually, of the newspaper. Right, it was the party newspaper, but in the back there would be these reports from factories all over the Soviet Union where the workers would get together and make a exposure of the conditions of their factory to the rest of the Soviet Union, often very oppressive conditions, especially before the revolution under the Tsar. So in the 1930s, Siegfried Kracauer had written The Salaried Masses, a very important sociology book. If you are looking for something to read, that's an important one. I haven't seen it translated into Tingviet yet, but it should. Socialism or Barbarie took up the project of co-research for a while. They were a French group influenced by Trotsky. But their leading thinker was Castoriadis. And they wrote very interesting things. Socialism or Barbary is a phrase made famous by Rosa Luxemburg 150 years ago or so, born and died 100 years ago or so, 100 and a bit. Socialism or Barbary, either we find a socialist solution for how we live on the planet, or capitalism drags us to destruction. Barbarism is their idea. But really the inquiry model, the co-research model, got its biggest push in contemporary times, and what made it popular was Aperismo in Italy. The Italian left in a journal called Quadrina Rossi. Rossi is red, right? And thinkers like Tronti and famously Antonio Negri, but others as well, developed this process where the workers would report on the Fiat factories and on other places, with the idea that without labor, there is no capital. Right? So labor has the power, but everywhere it doesn't seem to have power. Why not? Let's investigate. Tronti's idea, Mario Tronti, happened to have his book recently translated into English. Workers and Capital. He famously said that really nothing is known about the working class, not since Marx's time. Nobody's really done new studies. And while that was not completely true, but for Italian readers, maybe it was the case that they kind of still had a concept of class, the working class, that belonged to the 1850s, rather than what was happening in the 1950s in Italy. Like the class composition, as they talked about it, composition, the arrangement of forces and conditions was radically different 100 years after Marx. Now in other countries, there had been research into the condition of the workers. Krakauer's study, The Salaried Masses from 1930s Germany, would be a classic case. He looked especially at how the working class was divided into even more smaller fragments, and there were different categories like the salaryman and what he called shop girls, service workers in checkout. Shop girls. The shop girls go to the movies and they would dress up and go out. And there was a kind of consumerism as well, which Marx doesn't really much deal with. And anyway, the Italians made this style of doing research super visible and popular. And it was then taken up in Germany, especially by a group called Kolinko, which I think I did talk about in the Culture in the World course, where they did an inquiry into what it was like to work in a call center and how terrible the conditions for work were there, even though you were sitting comfortably at a desk and had all this high tech, exactly as we're all doing now. But the pressure for work was quite stressful. And so in the from 2000 onwards or so, the Edu Commission and co-research in education became a big thing and led to projects like the Queen Mary Map project that we talked about. And I think also it's behind the idea of this very course, like thinking about getting you to research into the conditions of an institution, like to ask questions like we did in that film about what are the circumstances that lead to the possibility of that institution working and our role in it. For example, what labor was produced, what labor was done that made it possible for you to come to class that day. All right, not today because we're not in class, but yeah, nonetheless, we can talk about what labor is done to make this exchange we're having now possible. Okay, like everything from maintaining internet to the administrative structure of the university that runs offline, an online teaching process, including checks, right? There's someone checking from the education faculty. Hello. And yeah, networking, and somebody built the tables in which you put your computer, in which somebody made the coffee, which makes it possible for me to continue teaching it all, etc., etc. So we wanted to, in the film, describe some of the process of doing co-research, and then also have more and more other courses that did that, so that students in the course would investigate something. In this course, we had last term, for example, looked particularly at the university. People went and interviewed different workers in the university. One of the assignments was, and I'm not sure we'll do that this time because it's been interrupted by online teaching, but one of the assignments was to spend part of the class time going out and interviewing people who worked in the university, but not teachers. It was not teachers, not the teaching staff like the professors, anyone else. So that meant interviewing ground staff, people who worked in Kituksa, the management, the people in the finance section, people who came to repair the electrics or the internet or the banking. You know, there was quite a funny interview with the guy from OCB who stocks the cash machine. And at first, I think probably that person thought, why are these people confronting me? I'm doing this job and there's money involved and you're not supposed to, like, it's a bit... I don't think anyone thought that students were going to rob the money, but, you know, it's unusual for that particular worker to be asked anything when they come to campus. And the interviews with the staff, the ground staff and the staff who clean the campus, and they do it a lot somehow invisibly. So what was important was that by having this project, this research project where we went out and asked these people things, they've made them more visible. We asked them, got them to reflect on conditions. Some of them didn't want to. Some of them gave really stock answers, but some really revealed some interesting material. Like, for example, that the grounds staff are not employed by TDTU directly, but employed by a separate company, a service company, and their conditions are pretty rough. I mean, not going into any of the detail, but, you know, quite strict targets on what they have to do, like pick up all the leaves and litter and so on by 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and quite restrictive holiday pay and questions about TEP bonus and stuff. Interesting. Now, even though we are doing something different in the class, it's still very similar. Classroom research, right? Research, co-research is also research in the social sciences, and so all of the criteria of good scholarship is still in place, still required, right? Like, sure, we weren't doing conventional university essays. People were drawing maps and so on, but there's still the whole apparatus of good scholarship, doing the reading, doing the work, referencing things, citing, thinking about definitions and conceptual development, having an argument. These were still at stake, right? So you needed to attend to the content of the course and really be responsive and invested in the project, right? So it wasn't a complete free-for-all or something just because we're doing something different. And you know, the final papers that were written for the course. This slide is directly from the course, so it talks about final papers. We're doing something different, actually. But there, they still had to do university essay style productions as well as their co-research. So I was asking for footnotes and references, an argument, and a structure. Yeah, good scholarship. And thinking about presentation and checking typos and all of that, paying attention to and being respectful of the argument of the scholars that you write about, but also being critical of them. And now that's an important thing, whether or not you're making a map or a film or writing a text, is to not misrepresent somebody else's ideas. Even if you want to criticize them, you kind of give them the respect that is deserved, and also be harsh and fair in your criticism. And there's the basic standard of good scholarship. And we're in a system that from top to bottom is about so-called good scholarship. And actually that's what I want to talk about in the second part. How that system is working and how from top to bottom, the metaphor of top to bottom is a little bit of a problem because I think it's flatter than that. But yes, there is a hierarchy, of course, which at one end is students as researchers. At the other end are the national level and international level research institutions. We talked about institutions at the start. They are institutions that do the ranking, that do funding and so on. And they have a certain ideology that we might want to critique, but we should understand as well. And we should try and learn about that. Which is what I want to do in the second part of the video. I'm going to stop this video now and just take a breath and come back in 5 minutes to continue. Just so that there's two parts as well, and to give people a break in their screens. So I leave the class on. I stopped sharing, but I'll stop the video recording as well. And